Hello and welcome to this series, The Person of the Therapist. I'm Dee Preston Dillon. I'm delighted today to welcome Nouf Bazaz. Now, Nouf is an artist, a professor, a clinical supervisor, and a clinician. So welcome, Nouf. I'm all, and my heart is warmed by the beauty of your own artwork behind you. That is stunning.
Thank you so much, Dee. So glad to be here. I know that even just so many years ago, so much of my education and training began with you. And so I'm just delighted to be having this conversation with you.
Nouf, one of the reasons I wanted
Mhm.
to be with you during our conversation is my understanding of the depth, my experience of you as the depth and the uh, above just superb critical thinking that you bring to the field, and your intuitive sensibilities, your unique, inventive, creative process that you bring and that you have shared with your clinical students, with your clients. I think there are a number of paths that we could take in this discussion. What would be the most important path? Where, I would like you to introduce us to where you are currently in your profession. Um, and then we can move from there in terms of what brought you to the field. What is it
Sure.
developmentally? What were the touchstones as you grew up that you became aware of in yourself? So let's start with where you are professionally, and if there's a pathway that you would like us most to focus on.
Sure, thank you. Um, And I can start with just even introducing some of the work that I'm doing right now. I am the co-founder and mental health director of the HEAL Refugee Health and Asylum Collaborative. We are based here in Maryland, and we primarily are serving survivors of war and persecution, individuals who have experienced torture and trauma, from children, adolescents, adults, and there's a variety of services that we provide. Some of the things that I've been most involved in have been our forensic evaluations, so psychological forensic evaluations of individuals from this population, um, that are used actually in support of their asylum applications or other humanitarian protections, as well as some of the therapy that I've done with children actually who were enrolled in our Survivors of Torture program, because I did use a lot of sand tray in that work. And so, I think some of the examples that I will probably be sharing today are going to be coming out of some of that work as well. And I'm also a professor of counseling. And so I teach primarily master's level students. And I really love that aspect of teaching and mentorship and supervision, because it's a really great opportunity to also play together and learn together and hold space together and be together through just some of this really great learning. And I love being able to teach classes such as creative counseling, where I can bring in a lot of Santray. But I will say, I don't just reserve Santray for my creative counseling classes. All the classes that I teach are going to have some element of Santray, expressive arts. I'm also right now working towards my certificate in trauma-informed expressive arts therapy and nature-based expressive arts therapy. And so all of that gets fused together.
Mm, mm, mm. Very grounding, and I don't think anybody's brought up nature-based
Mhm.
therapy in these interviews, and so and of course trauma-informed expressive therapy is just so the both of them.
Mhm.
It feels like such a nice balance. Would you say the name of the agency that you've co-founded
Sure.
again?
The HEAL Refugee Health and Asylum Collaborative. I know it's a mouthful.
Yeah, but I really wanted to
Mhm.
get our foundation there and the kind of a kind of essential work that you're doing with the most threatened populations and the most vulnerable populations, from children all the way through adults. Are you also doing groups there, families?
Yeah, so at Heal, we do groups. And so I'm not the one who's leading those groups, but right now, for example, one of the groups that we have are for individuals kind of age 16 to 25 who have been trafficked. So either in their home country or here in the US, so labor trafficking, sex trafficking, and we have two groups, a women's group and a men's group that are running concurrently. And
Mhm.
so that I would say is primarily right now the group work at Heal. Again, helping to supervise that, but I'm not facilitating those groups.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then in terms of family work, in some of my sessions, I brought in caregivers, especially when working with some of the children. And so I've brought in caregivers into some of those sessions, and and definitely interestingly used Sandtray for some of those, just to facilitate some of those sessions. And again, just seeing the power of that has been really, um, just really extraordinary.
Um, Dr. Bazaz, and I forgive me if I misspeak your last name,
Mhm.
Bazaz.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
What have you found as the most challenging with the work with these, the most vulnerable and clients who have experienced the most life-threatening violence, and I imagine more long-term
Mhm.
life-threatening experiences. And as a clinician and as a therapist supervisor, what do you feel are the biggest challenges to working with this population
Yeah,
and for the therapists?
sure. Really, actually, the biggest challenge, interestingly, is not necessarily a clinical one, it's a logistical one. And it's in terms of access. And so, for all the individuals that I've worked with in this population, the services have always been free of charge to them. And so, that's also meant collaborating with different organizations,
Mm.
seeking grant funding for the work, but then also being embedded and connecting with organizations that are providing some of those really critical wraparound services. And so providing case management services alongside the therapeutic work that I'm providing, providing transportation for clients to get to and from the center where we have the wonderful Santray. We can have the best Santray setup, but if nobody can get there, and if nobody can access it, there's really not much that you can do. And so it takes um, really just a lot of very dedicated, incredible individuals that I've worked with who have helped me so much with that logistical piece. And then even when, the children are when kids and families are coming, these are again centers that have donations for them to go through, various other forms of assistance while they're there. If I'm providing services to some of the children and adolescents enrolled in the program, I know that the caregivers are also getting counseling services from somebody else in one of the partner organizations or somebody else on my team. And so none of the work I do is in isolation, and it really takes a very large team to really make any of it happen. And so I would say that that is kind of like the largest piece is just that logistical piece. And once all those pieces align and when they all click, it's very worth it. It's so worth
Oh,
it. I love being able to work with this population, to provide those services, completely pro bono to them. Um, but it's a lot of moving parts in order to make that happen.
that's a lot on your plate. Nouf, I'd like to s- discover
Mhm,
who you are. How did you, the work that you're doing right now
mhm,
in such depth and with such vulnerability requires that you too understand the vulnerabilities of these populations, the courage, the risk taking, and the openness to being present to such huge human suffering how would you describe how you began, who
Sure,
you are, but what touchstones early on come up for you
sure.
that that anchor who you are?
Yeah. Um, I think so many things. So my family, we moved to the US when I was a small child. And so I grew up largely in New York, but I also grew up in a very, within a very rich, um, like Kashmiri diaspora community. And for me, we spent our summers going back to Kashmir. And really, from a very young age, I
Mm,
knew that, the work that I did, I wanted it to be just connected or in service to individuals who have experienced war and persecution. Kashmir is one of the most militarized regions in the world. And just from a young age, I knew that that's what I wanted to do. And, at first growing up, I thought maybe it would be in the form of journalism. And, I had this thought of, really wanting to just share these stories, just if people could know what was happening, maybe maybe it would put an end to some of this. And I just and at one point I thought I want to be a photojournalist. I want to be a journalist. Um, and then that sort of that morphed. I mean, I will say honestly, the photojournalism, I remember thinking I want to be a wartime photojournalist. And the thing that was actually the biggest deterrent for me was in realizing, was I think watching a documentary of
mm,
wartime photojournalists and being so inspired by it. And then at the end, when they ran the credits and showed that, I mean, almost everybody that they had covered had died, I thought, well, okay, maybe there's another way I could do some of this
yeah.
same work. And um and so then, as I was in my university studies, I was looking at global public health. And I thought, okay, well, this is a
Mm,
way in which maybe I can, serve a community through health. Health is so important. And so, after graduation, I was looking at primary going through like a academic route. I was really inspired by some of the like anthropologists, cultural anthropologists who were doing incredible work, for example, even just in Kashmir. And for me, I was reading their work and it felt like some of that just that really beautiful like truth telling too. I know it's like a funny phrase to use, but just that was how I was thinking about it when I was younger. And I was really inspired by that. And so I remember applying for a bunch of PhD programs in anthropology and getting rejected from every single one. But I did get accepted into a few master's programs. And the one I ended up selecting was trauma and violence transdisciplinary studies over at NYU. And I thought, oh, this is great. Let me do this. And then eventually I could, go back to school for anthropology and study the anthropology of violence. And so my that master's degree program was very interdisciplinary. And it was interesting because for the first time in my life, I was taking
mm.
psychology classes. I had never taken a psychology class before.
Oh,
Um, I was taking classes in trauma, and it was very, just the name, transdisciplinary. We were learning about trauma from literature as well, from art, from the lens of psychology, I mean, from so many different lenses. And while I was in that program, I took some counseling classes that were all like, because you were able to, there were some core classes, but then you can kind of make your own
mm,
degree. And I ended up selecting all the ones that were creative approaches to counseling. And so Robert Landy was over at NYU at the time, and I took a few classes with him. And he was, a premier drama therapist. And so for me, that was kind of my grounding in counseling. And around that same time, my anthropology classes, I absolutely hated. I just thought, wow, I
mm,
mean, it felt so dry to me
mm,
compared to something as alive as drama therapy. And of course, in drama therapy, there's storytelling, but it was in a way that felt like you were actually tangibly helping somebody and working with them as opposed to just writing about them. And from there, I then applied for PhD programs in counseling. Again, knowing that the population that I still wanted to work with were survivors of war and persecution. Um, mo most of my work in the US, really for the past 15 years or so, has been with the refugee community. So with torture and trauma survivors just residing here in the US, primarily in Maryland. And that's, I mean, and then we fast forward to here and, just still continuing that work. Now, in my practice with Heal, as well as just as a professor. And so, I feel fortunate that I can still work with the same population, just because I've never really had an interest in working with other populations. I mean, this is the population that I that I kind of that got me started, the population that I'm so passionate about, and one where I know that there are really deep issues around access.
Mm,
Um, I enjoy training others to work with this population. And I will say now, I am starting to do some other work, of course, apart from just a refugee, um, torture, trauma lens. Um, just because, especially in doing Sandtray, I do want to make it accessible to a lot of individuals. And so I have done some work then privately with folks around, just navigating transitions,
mhm,
or really individuals just much like myself who are doing this type of work. I bring a lot of students to my home Sandtray studio as well, just as a
mm.
way to process, reflect, think about future directions in their own pathways.
Wow. The thread that I'm hearing from your earliest days, right straight through all those uh,
Mm.
career type decisions, is the depth of your creativity and your willingness to be open, to be a to not over adapt to
Mhm.
what system expectations are, but to be true. And I love the phrase, the inclusiveness uh, uh, of your vision, but anchoring, grounding it in truth.
Mhm.
That truth finding and truth discovery and truth. Um, it, it, it takes courage to face truth, to be able to speak truth, and see that at the same present
Mhm.
of, of the violence of,
Yeah.
like, we don't escape our physical beingness, as you know, we don't escape the visceral resonance with the depth of empathy that you bring uh, from the physical violence and terror of your clients, and then helping your supervisees be mindful, have boundaries, and yet not distance, but to be so fully present.
Mm.
So that your ability to hold creativity, which is spontaneity and invention in the moment, at the same time, safety, enormous safety and trust with the populations that you work with, I think is phenomenal. I just think
Thank
that's
you.
incredible.
Thank you. And I would say that, one thing that has shifted a bit for me is, when I was younger, it was this idea of this, if only people knew, I just want people to know like the truth and what's happening. And I do think that that has shifted a bit into more of a how can in these one-on-one interactions with the folks that I'm working with, um, bear witness, um, open up a space for them. And I don't use the word lightly, but in a way that for them can be healing in whatever way that looks like, in terms of just that restoration.
Mm,
Um, I know that in the institute where I'm getting my certificate right now, it's run by Kathy Malchiotti, and she's an art
mhm,
therapist, an expressive arts
mhm,
therapist. And one of the things that she also talks a lot about is this idea of, aliveness and
mhm,
joy and the different ways in which we're really orienting ourselves towards seeking those. Um, and so much of it then has become just that that individual work that I'm doing um, with the folks that I'm working with. And I would say that it is even just something that helps to anchor me a bit because I think that that thought that I had growing up around if people just knew, um, I I think that is a little bit. has been stomped out of me a little bit, just because even right now we look around and we have, I mean, so much war, so much genocide, literally just live streamed. And I still think it doesn't move people to, in any way, I think,
Wow.
shift such to end all of this. And so I will say that right now,
Mhm.
of course, whatever it is that I can do, I guess to raise awareness, I will. But so much of what I do now, though, really is in that direct service. And I do feel really fortunate that I do have that honor actually of being in direct service to individuals. Um,
Mhm.
because even just for me, it's just God, I can feel like, okay, I'm doing something, which helps when you just, open your phone and you just literally see people being murdered in front of you on your phone. And so for me, I think, okay, in direct service, like, maybe I can't do anything for that person on my phone, but, you know, anybody who's, just coming through my path, at least I can do something there. Um, and so just I think, and then feeling like um, just a part of this community of I mean, some of the clinicians and students that I've met are just really
Mm.
incredible, phenomenal people, many of whom are also coming from similar backgrounds, and being able to just also hold space for them and be a part of their story as they're navigating doing this work. I think so often when we think about doing this work, we think just primarily of like, how hard it might be or some of that vicarious traumatization
Yeah.
um, and I don't know, like for me, I think of it as just it's a really incredible community of people who are there for one another, and who are doing this work together. And of course, I mean, it has an effect, but when you're building good community, in the process, you have folks to just be with and to be present with and to just kind of walk through all of that with.
Well, it's 2025 when we're
Mhm.
recording this conversation. And at this time, the the difficulty, the ringer that truth is going through
Mhm.
globally, and as you're describing the incredible traumas and violence that are, as you say, streamed, that are so visible. One of the threads that I appreciate, and I want to underscore what you just said, part of the discipline across all of the mental health approaches is an understanding, and I think this is true in education, that if people are taught or exposed or presented with the fact of others suffering, that they will be motivated in
Mhm.
some way to change a position. And I want to underscore the shift that you made
Mhm.
to from that aspiration, the inspiration of being a war zone type reporter to a moving in to being with, to walking the journey with those at their pace,
Mhm.
uh, walking with the traumatized. Um, and so I wanted to underscore that because I do think it's a myth that is covert, that is that's a trail that's under the riverbed that runs through mental health, that can be so damaging to the process of being fully present, of and humble in in that walk. So thank you for underscoring that. Um, Noof, what would you bring up as an example, working in the field for many years? There are moments when you felt inspired or
Mhm.
transformed by an experience with a client or clients. What comes up for you as
Sure.
a memory?
Um, there's a few that come up for me. Um, one that's coming to my mind right now is, I was working with like an adolescent, early teens, with an individual who had experienced a lot of trauma. One of the He was a refugee here in Maryland, and I remember, in our work together, one of the things that we did in the tray was he, just used all of the miniatures that we had and created this huge scene. And he basically said to me, this is what the inside of my brain looks like. And it was something that was very concrete. And and again, he was a very, I would say he was sort of parentified. He presented as being a lot older than he was. And so there was a part of me that when I was introducing Santry, I didn't want it to feel very kiddish. And so I think I described it as,
Mm.
like describing it as like if you were to make, a movie, like describe what's happening in this sand tray as if it was a movie unfolding. And he described it as, well, this is what's happening inside of my brain. And, and he was just, and it was very much like a war scene, with a lot of like the soldier miniatures and just a
Uh-huh.
lot of things that were happening there. And it was just so fascinating where he said, this is what's happening inside of my brain. And we could actually have a very just concrete conversation actually around what is that experience of what's happening inside of his body. I know he was using the word brain, but just inside of his whole
Yes.
body.
Yes.
With another individual as well, we at first a lot of the work was, was very metaphorical in terms of every time that we got in the tray, and he was a bit younger, maybe around like 8, 9, was he would kind of create these disaster scenes.
Mm.
And it was kind of my first introduction to understanding how active sometimes as a counselor you are, where together, he would guide me and tell me what he wanted me to do in the tray in terms of helping him to rescue some of these individuals. And
Oh.
so sometimes we would like shake the tray because there was an earthquake, and then, and then he wanted to get everybody to safety. And then so and I would ask him, okay, what can I do to help you? And he would direct me to help some of the people out while he was helping them. And there was a process we were doing together. And then,
That's a beautiful example of
yeah.
collaboration.
Oh, yeah.
Beautiful example. Collaboration and still following the lead of the client.
Yeah.
Those examples you just
Meeting them
gave,
where they
please.
are.
Yes, continue.
Yeah. And then, later on in our work, he did make one tray then that was very literally, he described to me his experience crossing the US-Mexico border. And it was a sort of one of the first times that he kind of wanted to dive a bit deeper into that. Before he had alluded to that, but I wanted it to be something at his own time and pace that he felt comfortable really diving into. And in this tray was where he really wanted to dive into it. And I asked, while we're after processing the tray, at the end I did ask him, is there a part of this tray, something that you want to just kind of take with you and hold,
Mhm.
something that this week you want to look back on, just something that could give you strength this week. Um, and he actually pulled out something very similar to this, where it was a bridge. So literally, it was something that he had, describing that border crossing, and it was covered with the toy soldiers. And he took off all the toy soldiers, and he said, this bridge is what I want to, um, I'm trying to remember the exact word that he phrased it in, so it's not my language, but generally saying that, this bridge is what he wanted to remember this week when he was
Yeah.
struggling. And just holding that, I do some somatic work, and so kind of holding that in his body. Um, I would say though that, and I'm rushing through some stories, but one of the most significant stories also for me was several years ago, where I was working with another child, around the age of 10, um, fleeing again with one. He came to the U.S. with one of his caregivers, fleeing persecution that was actually directed towards him, um, and was separated from his family. Had come here with one of his caregivers, and one of the things that was challenging was that he had a very strong speech impediment. and it was very difficult to understand anything that he was saying. Like to the point that it was actually hard to connect with him in those early sessions. And I had received some guidance that said, literally some guidance that just said, counselors need to learn how to shut up. And I thought, that's very interesting. Okay, I'm going to try that. And so we had a session in the tray where, for the first time, I wasn't just jumping in every 5 minutes with, oh, and what does this mean for you? And, and,
Yeah.
and how does this relate to your story? And tell, and I was just like, you know what? I'm going to shut up. And for about 40 minutes, he was just in the tray, making one tray after another, after another. And I remember even thinking like, oh my God, it's been 40 minutes. Like, am I allowed to do this? Like, is this okay? Um, and then at, really around that 40-minute mark, he just started naturally just narrating what he was doing.
Mm.
And it actually took me a few moments, a few minutes to realize that as he was narrating, he actually didn't have that speech impediment. And this is nothing to in any way stigmatize individuals with speech
No.
impediments, but just to say that it was an opportunity, that there was a certain fluidity that he was able to speak with, that it really did just strike me. And it was a way for us to, again, also just connect
Mhm.
and then really dive into just the work that he was doing in that tray. And so I shared some of the examples um, with children and adolescents, but I've also done this work with adults. And I mean, really all of my work that I've done with adults, expressive arts I do with adults, sand tray with adults, some of the movement and theater based, all of it with adults. And a story I can share with an adult is, again, this was a woman who was a torture survivor, had experienced just considerable torture. It was separated from key members of her family, including some of her children. And, in the tray, and with her, interestingly, the work that I did with her was virtual. And so just to say that, often, sometimes we can have a preference for doing this work in person because we know how powerful these 3D objects are and
Yes.
putting your hand in the sands. And I know that work is so powerful, but sometimes with access, it was virtual. We used a virtual sand tray. Um, and in that virtual sand tray, I'll say with her, one is that we integrated movement. So I'd like to integrate some of the movement and somatic work as well around like quite literally standing up and looking at that tray and noting what are the things that you want to that are pull or to push
Yeah.
or to reach or just some of those really essential movements. But the thing that struck me with her was in one of her pieces when she was talking about a bird that she had placed in the sand tray. Um, and how for her it was a symbol of hope because while it was kind of on shaky ground, kind of in her words, like it was still standing. It still had its head held up high. And I know her day-to-day reality was really incredibly challenging. And I don't want to say that, she left our sand tray and suddenly everything was better. Of course, with the individuals that we're working with, they're not gonna achieve that healing until they're back with their families, until, the family separation has ceased, until um, their family members are no longer under that threat of war and persecution. I mean, that is where like the ultimate healing is going to come from. But for me to know that just in terms of some of that relative day to day can just a little bit of hope
Mhm.
get her through just a few of these days. Um, and for me, it was just like maybe like that's just the work, and I think that's okay. I
Yes.
think sometimes there's this very grand language of
Mm.
healing, um, and healers and this. And I really truly believe that, healing is going to come when these systems of war, of racism, of persecution, when those systems are abolished. I mean, that's where true safety and true healing are going to come from. But on a relative lens, how is it um, that we are just walking with folks in the day to day? And again, she left feeling a little bit more hopeful. And I don't want to undervalue just that idea of being a little bit more hopeful.
Mhm.
You know,
Mhm.
being humble about the work that yes, it's just a little bit, but how that a little bit is sometimes it's a little bit, you know? Yeah.
Powerful, powerful. The human connection,
Mhm.
that validation you gave her, that she exists and that her suffering is true, and that another day of surviving and moving forward in the mundane, whatever it is that she's doing, just to validate that human spirit of getting through and having that the piece of hope, the bird
Mhm.
that with still holding its head up, the dignity that
Mhm.
you honored by allowing her that space. And then I really want to highlight that your incorporation of the body, which is so essential, like that, that grounded therapy, no matter if it's virtual or not, is the engagement of the body, as you were expressing, the moving away and the bringing in, and how beautifully that you were able to do that with her had to be a transformative experience somewhere inside her body, to reclaim her body was
Mhm.
indeed hers. You've been talking about Santori, and I know that you brought some figures, some symbols, and
Mhm.
so I'd like to use this moment to transition. If you could select from your symbols and start with uh, showing us right up to the camera your figure and what it symbolizes for you as a therapist, for your lived experience with clients, um, the very
Mhm.
polar opposites of what we presume about wounding and healing, whatever you want that to
Mhm.
be. What did you bring today?
I've got a few here, and so like,
Okay,
which one am I being called to choose right now? You know what? I'm actually going to choose this one. So, um, I, when I was going through my Sandtray studio downstairs, um,
there we go. Yes, yes.
I don't know why this little figurine just really stuck out to me. It's not the most profound piece that I have. It's not the most beautiful piece that I have. I know this is definitely like a dollar store trinket,
Mhm.
but there was just something about it that I don't know. I just grabbed it this morning in
What
anticipation.
is the quality there as you look at it?
Yeah.
What intuitively, um, what's the qualities or attraction?
Yeah.
There's, what are you seeing?
You know, there's this for me, I guess it's like this playfulness. There's a playfulness, there's a wide-eyed, like I'm ready. Like I'm ready to just like toss this ball back and forth. Um, and I don't know, just that playfulness. Now that I'm actually looking at it a little bit, I didn't think of it this morning, but there's a little bit again of that, some of that joy that comes from
Mhm.
it as well. That aliveness, that movement.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
I
Yeah,
can't, I don't even think this little guy has made it in any of my trays right now, but I don't know, right now, this morning and right
I
now,
like
I just really like him.
it.
Yeah.
Oh, but it looks so good with your painting
Oh,
in the
thank you. I know.
background.
See, now I'm giving him like a fancy
No, that
discount.
but the that ball is right on its foot. This,
Mhm.
as you said, the movement, it's like ready, and it
Yeah.
and that wide-eyed
Mm.
receptivity. It's
Hmm.
uh, spontaneous and openness.
Yeah.
It feels very safe and very welcoming. It feels like an invitation to come and play.
I would say I'm kind of like almost going back right now to like um being in elementary school and learning about different types of energy and
Uh-huh.
thinking of, one of the things that you said is reminding me of the idea of this ball feels like
Mm,
the potential energy, right?
yes.
As opposed to the kinetic energy, the potential. I'm going back to elementary school science, but it's that potential energy of that ball right now
Yeah.
of just also where is that going to go? Um, and I don't know, it's just his face, he
Hmm.
just seems not, I mean, at first I was gonna say happy but happy feels too like happy-go-lucky. But there's
Right.
something about him that just feels kind of contented or just calm or
It feels very
joyful.
honest. It feels
Yeah.
very non-pretentious.
Yeah.
Could you turn it around so we could see the back also?
I
Uh-huh.
know.
Little tail and the
Yeah.
scarf. Uh-huh.
But
Yeah.
again, I will say most of my Santray collection is from Goodwill, is from the dollar
Sure.
store.
Yeah.
This one, and also once people know that you are you collecting all these miniatures, I'll say collecting, um, and like I think this one my husband saw at some Dollar Tree or dollar store when he was
Uh-huh.
there,
Oh,
and he picked it up for me. Um, and
it's
I don't know, right now it's just really speaking to me.
it's
So,
really
yeah,
special. It's really
yeah.
special.
He's really cute too. I don't know,
Yes.
there's just something about him.
Mm. And the colors
Yeah.
too, that
Mhm.
the legs in that bright
Yeah.
sunshine yellow and the little beak there.
Mm.
But it feels very ready. Like
Yeah.
you had described. It feels very in the moment. I'm ready
Mhm.
and welcoming, very welcoming.
Yeah.
What else did you bring?
What else did I bring? Okay. So this is one of my favorite thrift store finds. I've got this
Oh,
beautiful one over here.
yes. Oh,
Yeah.
gorgeous.
I
Describe
love
it in your
this.
own words.
Oh, I love this piece. I feel like there's so many things for me, the part that kind of sets out the most to me is just this holding. And especially like, with this, like this
Yeah.
shawl,
Mhm.
it's a little bit of like a protection from the elements and this holding. And it feels very much to me like just this very loving space. And actually, you might not be able to see it here in the camera, but the figures that are on the inside
Oh, yeah.
also like a soft smile on them.
Uh-huh. Yes.
The one on the top, less of a soft smile, but in here, more of a soft
Yeah. The
smile.
littles. Yes.
Yeah. So
And
I'm
so
very
they're being
fortunate to have a
held.
good thrift
Go
store
ahead.
next to me. I'm very
Yes.
fortunate to have a good thrift store, I'll
Yeah,
say.
you are. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That is um with the wolf
Mm-hmm.
there, that is such a piece that, as you described, the almost the safety of the holding
Mm-hmm.
and the nurturance
Mm-hmm.
that's there. But it as you described, the tapestry
Mm-hmm.
that the cloth, the woven
Mm-hmm.
organicness, and then right beneath them is instinct, there's nature, there's the power of
Mm.
voice. I really appreciate that piece.
I'll show you one more of my pieces then. This is another Dollar Tree purchase. So when I was starting to have my collection, I discovered this, like, I guess, fairy garden type
Yes,
thing.
yes.
And so one of the things at the Dollar Tree is they have all these miniatures that will eventually not only be just a couple of dollars, but they will be 75% off with an additional 50% off. And, something like this, I think I could have even gotten for like 30 cents
Sure.
eventually with
Oh,
all those sales. And,
wow.
and I like this one just,
Yes.
it points to just
Yeah.
all of the different possibilities, all of the different pathways. For me, I'm also, just me personally, I also do love camping and hiking and being in the outdoors. And so it carries a little bit of that sense of like
Nature.
wonder from nature. Oh, see, Dee, bringing it back to my nature-based work. Yes.
Yes, yes.
Um,
It
yeah.
truly looks that way. I mean, starting with waterfall and then
Mhm.
life in it's a fish pond, and
Mhm.
then moving to it looks like, oh, fire pits where
Yeah.
we nurturance,
Mhm.
food, and then tent
Campground.
grounds.
Shelter.
So
Mhm.
the grounding,
Hmm.
back to the enclosures, the
Yeah.
safekeeping. Wow. And
Yeah.
also, I imagined while you were talking, those little signs representing the specializations, as it were, that you are an artist and you love drama therapy and you love the nature therapy and you love being with the symbolic in
Mhm.
working with your clients, as well as the expressive therapies in really immersing
Mhm.
all of those little signs representing some component that you yourself
Mm.
bring, as you describe that, as optional directions in the way that you work with clients. Those are very cool.
Thank you. I
Um,
wanted to also get, I'm glad that I also got all of the ones that are thrift store and Dollar Tree. And this one, this bridge one, I think is from
yes.
Play Therapy
Mhm.
store, but it's from the dollar section of the Play Therapy
Okay.
website. So I know that it can feel really daunting to, for individuals who might be thinking about starting a sand tray collection.
Sure.
Um, but it is actually kind of fun to
Yes.
mass
Yes.
all of the miniatures.
Yes.
Yeah.
And to definitely not go to go with one's intuition to the
Mhm.
secondhand stores and garage sales and all of that, rather than buying necessarily prepackaged. There's a couple of items in often in prepackaged, but there's so much more. Like your spouse found the little one, and it was holding, it's holding so many layers of meaning
Mhm.
for you. I'm so delighted. I have a playful question. If you were to take the bridge as a crossing point and place the figures on one side or the other, or a figure on one side or the other, how would you set that up?
Hmm. So I don't have one of, actually, I have here. Um, I don't have my sand tray with me, but I've got a book.
Perfect.
Um,
Perfect.
the color of sand. So that one,
Yes, yes.
Brush of the Masters, drawings from Iran and India. Okay,
Oh, that's
so we're gonna
perfect.
take that
Holy
book.
cow. Yes.
Let me see. Hmm, let me see how I would set this up.
Well, and I think the book is great. As a professor, you are a foundation of knowledge, and then bringing in works from India that remind us of myth, symbol, and ritual around the world, that we are a humanity that can grow and that have used healing throughout generations through myths, symbols, rituals, which is what we're creating right now in our interview.
Let me see.
And this course could be a bridge of connection as well as a bridge of waiting.
think I'll set
Ah,
it up like this.
oh, look at that.
So,
That's, please describe
sure.
how it is for you,
Let me see.
little one.
Yeah. So this is kind of in the back, sort of as an anchor in terms of all of the different directions,
Uh-huh.
all the different possibilities. Um, this bridge is also just here, sort of in the center. My
Mhm.
first initial impulse was to put these objects like kind of on opposite side of the
Hmm.
bridge
Mhm.
that maybe could represent like somewhat of a connection, but
Mhm.
actually for me, it felt like it was compartmentalizing too much.
Uh-huh.
And so
Uh-huh.
that's why I
Separating.
wanted it here in the
Ah,
print to say that,
yes.
these two figures are actually, um, I don't know, they're this one keeps falling, but this is why we do this in sand, everybody.
Yeah.
This is going to be an excellent reason as to why we use the sand to anchor these objects. Um, but they're facing each other, they're
Yes.
interacting with each other, they're playing with each other maybe in their own way.
Hmm.
And I don't know, for me, right now where I'm at, I don't want something that feels compartmentalized. There's like a unifying
Yes.
idea of all of this.
Yes, yes. And now the little ones, the children, as well as the one who is doing the holding, the
Mhm.
nurturing, are facing the creative little soccer guy, but
Hmm.
it's marvelous because the soccer guy, who's a kind of a bird,
Yeah.
is also facing the wolf. And so
Yeah.
a conversation potentially between instinctual parts of
Mhm.
you, as well as the nurturing, holding, witnessing part of you, facing that readiness, that spontaneous, curious inner child within you. And then, right, and I love the way you set it up. So it is that too often we assume the bridge is a connection, but it can be a divide.
Mm.
It is it's a holding space for that which runs underneath and that which crosses over. And then right and back, the closest to you is about direction. It's a beautiful, and I really like that you put it on the book, the great book to pick up, to be the holder of the images, the symbolic, so much that I feel you represent as the nurturer, as the thinker, as the one who is discerning, as the one who can be playful, who is wide eyed and open and continuing your own
Mm.
wide eyed, artistic, spontaneous. The beauty of your inner child as you are wide eyed, watching how war journalists were able to capture and how you now are helping others to capture moments in their lives and validating
Mm.
those moments in their lives.
Well, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been such a delight to be able to work with you this morning. Thank you so much.
Oh, I wonder if before we close, if
Sure,
you would have something that you want to say to our viewers
sure.
from your heart about either what you hope for them in their practices, no matter what stage they're at. Um, yeah, let me leave it with you
Sure.
there.
Um, one of the things that even with my students that I'm always sharing is, in this work, it's so important to be really interdisciplinary.
Mhm.
And um, when you're in, for example, counseling, and if you're only consuming counseling
Yeah,
literature, for example, or
right.
counseling trainings, I think that you're really missing out. There's so much to be learned
Mhm.
from history, from literature, from current events, from some of the really amazing uh, folks who are doing so much of the work right now on the ground,
Yeah.
as well as just integrating whatever it is that people are passionate about. For me, it's art. It's such a, I don't know, it's just something that for me provides me with just so much release and comfort and peace as well. And I found ways to integrate that into the work that I do,
Mm.
into the sand tray. I would also say that with the sand tray itself, it's something that is such an amazing tool in our work with others that I think we can forget that we need to also revisit it personally.
Yeah.
And so it's something that really continuously we ourselves also have to be in the tray, even if it's something that's just by ourselves
Yeah.
individually.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll
Mm.
make trays and I'll use that as a launching point to write some poetry actually about the scenes and the worlds that were created. And it's a great exercise
Oh,
because there's so much imagery that's already there that's so rich. Um, to do your own trays, maybe as a part of your own counseling, or maybe also just in community, with your own mentors. Like I've been so fortunate, Dee, to do trays with you, and so I really would love to leave folks with that, just in terms of making sure that they're also in the tray themselves. They're opening the space for others, but it's also important
yes.
for us to be visiting it personally.
Dr. Bazaz, you have brought us a ground to your incredible artistic creativity, the paintings behind you and their juxtaposition, a whole nother world to go into, your poetic self, your dramatic self, but you're very grounded. an understanding of history and literature and anthropology, and all of that threading into a sincere, authentic, realistic presence with others. I'm very grateful for our time in this conversation. Thank you for grounding us into what seems opposites: human suffering and trauma and creativity. And yet they both must be for that road that we sometimes call healing. What an incredible journey.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And viewers, taking up what Dr. Bazaz shared with us today, using your own time to journal, to put your hands in the sand, and if you don't do sand, to find your way to a secondhand store and maybe find a miniature or a toy that you once had as a child, or that appeals to your inner child, and to just keep pushing forward the boundaries of creativity and trust yourself to understand and to be so fully present. I look forward to being with all of you the next time we are with the person of the therapist. Take very good care.
Thank you.